Hello everyone, thank you for being here today to hear about the bird movement component of the Saline Lake Ecosystem's Integrated Water Availability Assessment. My name is Cory Overton. I work out of the U.S. Geological Survey Western Ecological Research Center's Dixon Field Station in Central California. I will be presenting our work by our team led here by Principal Investigator Mike Casaza. For those not already familiar with the Saline Lakes IWAS work, our science strategy was released last year and included 5 themes of inquiry that guide our science, which are broadly understanding water budgets across terminal lakes, understanding hydrologic vulnerabilities across lakes, understanding resource and bird community across lakes, understanding the mechanisms that change bird distribution, abundance, and use of saline lake ecosystem resources, and to identify how much water is needed to sustain habitat for wildlife now and in the future. The last 3 primary science questions are the ones more specifically focused on bird movement and which I am addressing today. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the legislation specifically identified 20 terminal lake basins, although we operate with the recognition that species will often have ecological dependencies throughout their range that may be relevant to understand local ecosystem functions and needs. Those science topics are pretty broad, so to drill down a bit to some more specific types of questions that we are looking into. These include things like assessment of demographic events like nesting or mortalities, habitat or other resource use and selection, which require identifying or developing habitat maps relevant across appropriate scales, movement patterns or behaviors, also at multiple scales, from local site use to migration ecology, foraging ecology, and identifying ultimate drivers for observed behaviors or patterns. I had water quality, quantity, consistency, food resources, among other factors, drive bird movement and site occupancy. Of the hundreds of bird species that use the Great Basin each year, these are the 38 species that are estimated to have more than 10% of their North American population within the Great Basin at any point of the year, and to have half of that Great Basin population specifically associated with our list of 20 saline lakes. We also recognize 2 additional subspecies, the Thule goose and greater sandhill crane, which are species of special concern due to limited breeding range and low population sizes that are dependent on the saline lakes region. From these 40 taxa, we have identified 6 species for which we have been or are considering in-depth investigation. They were chosen because each demonstrates an affinity for saline lake ecosystems and collectively are dependent on a wide breadth of ecological functions from the lakes. These 6 species are eared grebe and Wilson phalarope, American avocet and blackneck stilt, American white pelican, and cinnamon teal. USGS-led field studies into these species have thus far focused on the American avocet. We identified nesting avocets, which we capture using remotely triggered bow nets. We collect morphometric data from each bird before fitting it with a backpack-mounted GPS tracker that communicates via the cellular network to deliver both GPS and accelerometry data. These data streams can produce information on activity and behavior in addition to estimates of movement and location. I want to stress that the following information reflects our provisional initial assessments of the data collected thus far, and we anticipate revision and reinterpretation as more data is made available. Over the last 2 summers, we have marked 100 avocet as part of the Saline Lake Ecosystem IWAS effort. This map shows the approximate marking location for each individual. 2 pilot birds were marked near our office in Central California. 39 were deployed at Great Salt Lake and 39 among various terminal lakes in Oregon. This year we deployed 20 within the Lahontan Valley in Nevada. Additionally, we have obtained tracking data from 12 additional birds marked in California as part of other collaborative projects, many of which moved into the Great Basin. In the year and a half since we started, we have collected nearly 1 million locations from marked avocet. As of last week, they produced over 66 migration tracks, roughly evenly split between movements into California's Central Valley and San Francisco Bay, and movements to the Salton Sea, Colorado River Delta, and down to Mexico's Costa Alegre. This includes at least 279 individual visits to the 20 named terminal lakes in our system, with individual avocets visiting up to 10 lakes since deployment. Among the birds returning from last year, nearly 1/3 returned to the lake that they bred at the prior year. The other species we have marked for the Saline Lakes IWAS is the Wilson's phalarope. This work is in coordination with researchers at the University of Connecticut and Okonos. In 2023, we piloted use of a 2-gram satellite transmitter on Wilson's phalarope, which I think still stands as the smallest bird species tracked by satellite in North America. We also deployed MODIS tags in the Klamath Basin after deployments at Mono Lake were unsuccessful. This past year, we provided 10 MODIS tags, which are being deployed at Mono, Klamath, Great Salt Lake, and within the species breeding range in Saskatchewan. MODIS tags don't provide location data themselves, but instead provide presence data among a global set of receiving stations, and locations are inferred based on the positions of those receivers. Over the last few years, 70 phalaropes have been tagged in North America with MODIS transmitters. 27 of those have been detected and provided information regarding 123 movements between MODIS receiver locations. 3 individuals marked this year have thus far only shown local movements within their breeding range. 24 other birds provided information reflecting post-breeding movements into the Great Basin or Great Plains, or fall migration movements further south. 4 of the birds that migrated south last year were detected returning north in the spring, and thus far one of those individuals has initiated a second fall migration. Saline lakes are sparsely represented in the MODIS station network, and only 4 of the migrating individuals have been identified at our terminal lakes, plus 8 individuals marked this year at Great Salt Lake. 5 lakes in the project area have a total of 21 MODIS stations active, and phalaropes have been detected at 11 of those. So that is the taste of what the data from the Saline Lakes bird movement component looks like. The photos here show an avocet marked at Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge with a 10-gram backpack transmitter, and an adult leading chicks through the water at Farmington Bay in Great Salt Lake. Now I will transition to some initial results and what we have seen thus far. Sticking with phalaropes for a minute, the satellite tags we deployed in 2023 are a device called Platform Transfer Terminals that estimate location via Doppler shift rather than using GPS satellites. This results in lower accuracy location estimates, but the tag can transmit whenever they have sufficient battery life and when the constellation of Argo satellites is overhead. We marked 5 birds, but hardware issues occurred with 1, and we only received data from 4 tags, all deployed at Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge. The tags provided over 700 locations, and 3 individuals initiated fall migration with routes and movement patterns impacted by the 2023 hurricane, when Hurricane Hilary's landfall coincided with a Southern California earthquake. 1 individual made some dramatic detours through the Pacific Ocean before disappearing near Magdalena Bay in Baja Sur, Mexico. Another traveled a similar but more direct path south and found a terminal lake basin in Baja Sur that was flooded as Hurricane Hilary passed over a few days prior. The bird eventually backtracked to the Colorado River, where we lost contact with the tag. We were very concerned when the last individual stopped in the Mojave Desert. Due to the inherent inaccuracies possible with these tags, we were not sure that it was still alive until it moved to Fort Irwin Air Base and occupied its airstrip, which was flooded following the hurricane. After several days, it continued its migration through central Mexico. After a brief stop at the coast, it traveled to Mexico City, where it remained using lakes adjacent to the city for several weeks. The avocet data is much more robust, and the data really speaks for itself. Within the first week that we had avocets marked, we saw how dynamic and critical hydrologic patterns can be in these systems. These are false color satellite images of Farmington Bay. The image on the left shows the location of 12 avocet nests as birds were being marked in the middle of May 2023. Satellite images collected 6 days later indicate flooding that resulted from high temperatures and rapid snowmelt throughout the system, and showed that water had reached most nests, resulting in failure for the majority of birds marked the previous week. Fortunately, avocets seem to be dedicated nesters, and we see a lot of indications of re-nesting activity, including for many of these birds. Relevant hydrologic dynamics also operate on longer scales as well. Our avocet data at places like Summer Lake and also Lake Abert really show the pace of seasonal desiccation of the playa-type lakes in the system. Here we see early summer locations in purple at the edge of Summer Lake Playa, and just 2 months later, the distribution of bird use has shrunk to less than a quarter of the area. This change in distribution closely tracks the discharge from the Anna River shown on the right. In each of the last 2 years, by the end of summer, avocet have either been restricted to freshwater flows from springs at the margin of the lake or to managed impoundments that are part of the Summer Lake Wildlife Area at the mouth of the lake. Similarly, The relative distribution of avocet locations at Lake Abert show that marked bird use is concentrated in a few locations around the lake. We have marked our nesting birds at the northeast corner, which shows a series of linear hotspots from nesting individuals that are along freshwater springs in the area, and a more diffuse region that foraging and non-nesting birds occupy. Around the margin of the lake, bird use is punctuated at a few locations, typically near where freshwater springs occur. Inward from the western shoreline is a ridge that becomes exposed as the lake level drops and attracts a lot of bird use. These are just a few examples of what initial data tell us. In our future efforts, we plan to expand our efforts to document space use and movements of other species. Specifically, we hope to leverage some other ongoing work and mark additional white pelicans this coming year. We also plan to mark eared grebe, black-necked stilts, along with cinnamon teal over the next 2 years. We recognize that we are not the only ones out marking birds in this space. A lot of current and past work is producing data relevant to this effort. In many cases, the intended scope of these efforts is far more limited than how the data can ultimately be used. In other words, there is so much more value in these efforts that often goes unrealized because it's hard to access and identify the data. Which is why, in addition to these data collected specifically for the Saline Lake IWAS effort, our office has several projects and collaborations with a broad coalition of state, federal, and NGO partners that leverages additional marked birds to broaden the data stream and provide additional value to the Saline Lakes effort. Among the 40 taxa that we have identified as being heavily dependent on the Saline Lake ecosystems, we have procured access to data on 14 of them, effectively adding over 1,300 marked individuals and 8 million additional locations to our understanding of how the system works for migratory birds. These data provide a wealth of information about species use, needs, and responses to changing conditions at saline lakes, but also of how this system is interconnected with other parts of the continent and affect subsequent life history states. We can make this data and insights from it available as quickly as possible through various methods. Chiefly, we disseminate the data using a series of data releases to the USGS data repository at ScienceBase. Over the last few months, we initiated quarterly provisional releases to enable near real-time use of bird tracking data. These will be followed with annual releases of data with more complete QA/QC review and possibly annotation with secondary data sources such as weather, habitat, and water conditions. One avenue for more direct delivery of these data and the insights that they produce is through the AIMS system that we are developing. I've spoken to several of you about AIMS already, and we have a paper devoted to the AIMS concept in the Journal of Environmental Management, so I won't belabor it here. Other than to say that it is a system to collect, summarize, and deliver environmental and animal movement information that is needed without requiring specialized skills to use, but it is only useful with end-user support and engagement. Our current use cases include site-specific reporting tools for land managers, which we deliver monthly to state wildlife areas and refuges in California. We also produce reports to track individual species and monitor changes in behavior, activity, or location. We also create reports for specific themes, like monitoring survival during disease outbreaks or drought response. If you have data that would help answer some of these questions we pose here, or if you have questions to pose to the data we have currently, I encourage you to reach out to me, Mike, or anyone from the Saline Lakes team so we can work with you to develop the tools you need. Fall migration is well underway. We are getting another season of data about movement through the Great Basin by many species and are continually impressed by the quantity of data produced from the avocet data stream. We look forward to adding additional species to the data stream over the next year. This project has only been possible through the support of folks that have helped in the office, in field, and with access, and finding birds, and recovering transmitters, and all the thousands of things that have gotten us to where we are. We thank our staff here in the Dixon Field Station and all the refuge and state wildlife personnel who have helped us in the field. Also to the rest of the Saline Lakes team and our project partners. Lastly, thank you for your attention.